Now that our boy Aang has obtained the powers of a necromancer, similar to solo leveling, we return to the city of Pakadia. Where Paris was shocked to learn that Aang had still not yet returned. The guard on duty reports to her that it was true, even informing her that as the sun is setting along with the recent attack on Pethor City due to a demonic wave, they were closing the city doors soon, including the side doors of the city. Flexing her hard-toned abs once again, Paris yells at the guard to report to her about the levels of the surrounding demons right away. The guard was alarmed but remained hard. If you know what I mean, he reports to her that recently, there hasn't just been one-finned demons appearing, but double and triple-finned had been spotted alongside the quadruple-finned demons that they had sighted recently. Hearing that information made her nervous as she bit her nail, thinking about the chance that Aang might have been eaten by the demons. She knew that she had to get him back here. Since she reported the names for the competition, she could only hope that Aang doesn't make things complicated for her. And so, she rushes out to the city, telling the guard that she was heading to the practice to find Aang and that they would return before the city doors close. Paris darts across the ruins of the forest at a rapid pace. As she did, she thought about how she had become too lax. Knowing that Aang was just a kid who was a regular warrior from SSS-Rank city, she couldn't believe that she had let him go to the battlefield on his own. Even though he had insisted on it, she knew that the practical battlefield basically only has finless demons. But just a few years ago, quintuple-finned demons were sighted here too. She continues to rush with all her might, feeling ashamed of herself as a quintuple-finned warrior if she lets Aang die in the practical battlefield, and also feeling that she had failed Helios City as well. Leaping through the trees, she hoped that Aang was still alive, but as she delved deeper into the forest, she soon came across a dark and eerie aura. She could feel a demon's presence, making her wonder how there was such a thick presence of death that was coming in the direction of the practice battlefield. She could also feel that the aura she was sensing wasn't good, as it seems that there were quite a lot of demons around. She could easily see in her mind that there were a large number of single-finned and double-finned demons, but then triple-finned demons started to appear as well. She began to question this, wondering why there were large numbers of double-finned and triple-finned demons gathering together. As she continues to make her way towards the source of the deathly aura, she meets a familiar demon. It turns out to be the loser who tried to kill Aang. It soon sees the core of Paris's, which made it immediately stop in its tracks, knowing that it had stumbled across a quintuple-finned warrior. So it tried its best to run away from her, but it was useless as she appears behind him in a flash. Like Minato from Naruto, she lands a powerful downward strike of her own, smashing the skull of the wood demon into pieces with a single leg strike. After seeing and killing the wood demon, she felt that something was strange, as though it was different from usual. Whilst in the middle of her thoughts, a horde of demons emerged from the darkness of the forest, surrounding her. Paris was still calm, looking at the horde of demons. She commented that it was strange, wondering when demons like them started to congregate together. But it didn't matter to her right now, as she knew that she needed to kill them all before the city doors closed. Seeing that time was tight, she immediately summons her nanotech weapon. It turns out to be Guan Yu's Green Dragon Crescent Blade. A guando to be specific, a Chinese pole weapon. Upon close inspection of the demons, she sees that they were acting like corpses. She could smell the scent of death on their bodies, and that they only have the goal of pushing forward in mind. But still, Paris smiles, knowing that all these things don't matter. As long as they were demons, they simply needed to die. And so, as she takes a massive step back, posing with her mighty weapon, her eyes glared hard, unleashing the warrior within. She flexed every inch of her muscles, from her face to her arms, that could be seen through her suit. One swing was all it took. Paris had unleashed the secret arts of the sweeping bowed slash. Becoming the ultimate wood chopper, her attack slashes through every demon throughout the forest. But even after her attack, she could see that there were more coming up from behind, making her wonder how many more were there. Then Aang makes his appearance directly behind her. Much to her surprise, she immediately swings her weapon at the presence behind. Bang! Went their weapons as Aang summons his greatsword to block hers. He shouts at her, telling Paris to look at who she was attacking more carefully. His voice manages to snap her back into reality. Surprised by his sudden appearance, she calms down and asks if he was all right. But what was more alarming to her was the fact that Aang had managed to block her sweeping slash. That slash was a reflective attack, so both its speed and power were immense. And yet Aang was fine as he retracts back his weapon, making her surprised that a kid like him from a C-rank city was able to block it, knowing that even if he was a quadruple-finned warrior, he would have needed to use all of his strength to block that attack. As Aang shakes his hand, he tells her that her quintuple strength core was really amazing, as his hand had gone numb from blocking the attack. He then apologizes to her, explaining that he had been trying out some new moves, making him forget about the time. Paris tells him that it was fine, since he was alright, but now what was important was that they eliminate these demons that were acting strangely. Seeing that there were many triple-finned demons among the horde, she thought it was dangerous for Aang, so she told him to get behind her. But our boy casually tells her that they were all dead as he walks past. With just a snap of his fingers, the deathly aura that was inside the demons were all released, rendering them completely dead this time. Much to the surprise of Paris, seeing that it was settled, Aang looks at her, telling that they should go back to the city. But our girl wasn't that dumb. She slams her hand against his chest, asking him how it was possible for him to control all these demons when his core was clearly a strength-based red core, so she asks him, "What is your ability?" But Aang simply pushes her hand away, telling Paris that they were simply collaborating partners with one another and that there was no need for him to explain things to her. His reply made her fall silent, but he does reveal to Paris that he had the ability to control dead demons slightly, knowing that in this apocalypse, it's normal for a warrior like him to keep quiet about some of their abilities so that they can use it as a hidden card. Seeing the dead demons, she couldn't believe that Aang had such an ability, as it was rare even amongst the quintuple-finned warriors like her. Believing what he said, she then tells him that they'll make their way towards the city of the breaking dawn, which was happy news to Aang as he shouted out loud that it was great, since he needed to settle the problem of getting Helios City's energy crystal reissued to them quickly. And so, he probably announces that they should go tomorrow. Paris simply followed behind him, thinking that she could look forward to Aang's performance on the day of the demon hunting competition. But Paris, who had been busy trying to return to the city, failed to notice the statue of the practice battlefield in the distance. As we zoomed past the trees to where Aang was previously, we saw tons of dead demons, piled up like mountains all around. According to the report that eventually came later, the practice battlefield was reported to be completely destroyed by an unknown power. A heavily armored vehicle soon comes to a stop. Aang and Paris come out of it. As they did, Paris tells him that they were here and warns him not to embarrass their city. But his eyes were drawn to something that left him shocked, recalling the environment and terrain he saw during the ride. He couldn't believe that he was right in front of the city of the Breaking Dawn, the only S-rank city, the city that he used to manage. Looking at it closely, he could see that the city had been renamed to Breaking Dawn City, after he died in battle during his past life, making him wonder if it was because of that battle that they renamed the city to Breaking Dawn. But he thought that it looked way more majestic now compared to back then. He thought that it would be a long time before he returned to this city, but the thought of seeing the 6 of them here brightens his face. The strongest team he brought together in his past life, his 6 strongest subordinates known as the 6 Talents. He wonders what happened to them after the battle for Breaking Dawn. Would they believe him if he told them about his current situation? Paris appears by his side, asking him if he was scared out of his mind from seeing Breaking Dawn City for the first time, but she tells him not to be shocked yet since he hadn't gone in yet, as Dawn City is humanity's only S-rank city, representing the core of their strongest forces. But she tells him that not everyone was lucky enough to be able to visit Dawn City at least once in their life. Hearing all this from her, Aang thought about how Paris knew some useful info as one of the quintuple core warriors, so he asks her about what happened to the 6 Talents after the battle for the Breaking Dawn and how they were now. His question was enough to make her pause in her steps. As she finds it a little strange, she turns around, asking Aang if he was talking about the new 6 Talents or the old 6 Talents. Aang was confused by what she said about the old and new, so he asks her about the group that was led by the strongest warrior called Aang, the king bearing the same name as him. But the moment those words left his lips, Paris immediately blocked his mouth with her hand, calling him a bastard and wondering if he was an idiot, or just pretending to be. She informs him that everyone knows that the new 6 Talents didn't like hearing others talk about the old 6 Talents, so she warns Aang not to say anything like this inside the city. As for the king, she reveals to him that the dynasties have changed, and that the king was no longer a king. And right now, the strongest warrior is the new king, while the king he was talking about, the strongest warrior Aang, is now the old king. And so she warns him again to not say such thoughtless words inside the city, but Aang still wanted to know more about the past talents, so he asks her once again. This time, Paris was furious as she grabbed onto his shirt, yelling at our boy about whether he understood her words. Her scolding was loud enough to be heard by everyone around them as the other members of her team looked at her. which made her let go of his shirt, but as she did, she told him that she couldn't understand why Aang would use the name Aang. Even though it might be out of his own respect, she never intended to ask. This is when she warns him for the third time, that at least within Breaking Dawn City, there shouldn't be any mention of the old king and the old 6 talents again. As she turns to leave, she reveals to Aang that there might be people in C-rank Helios City who still respect such beings, but not everyone does, especially in Breaking Dawn City. This new information shocks our boy's world as he remains still after hearing it for the first time. Paris then tells him to hurry up so that they could enter the city, reminding him to remember what she just said. And so, as they made their way inside the city, Aang's head was filled with the thoughts that not everyone had acknowledged him, not even his sacrifice, making him question what in the hell happened after his death. He had led the 6 talents and all the warriors, fighting the demons with all their might. The reason he entered the Steel of the Ancient King alone was also to find the secrets of the demons. Steel of the Ancient King, in the year 3069, 69 baby, 6 enormous stels of the Ancient King descended from the skies. Crimson, yellow, green, blue, violet, and black, demons of 6 different core colors poured out of the stels of the Ancient King endlessly. That was the origin of the demons. Nobody knows what is hidden within the stels of the Ancient King. Right now, only the former Aang discovers the secret that the stels of the Ancient King contained an 8-finned demon. But as he walked, Aang couldn't help but think that everything he did was meaningless, making him question if he had not died as a hero. He soon reached the end of the hallway and was greeted by a bright light. The moment he stepped into it, he could see many people walking around happily, there was even a dog. As he looks up to the city, he sees that the center of it has been upgraded a lot. The mega-city known as Breaking Dawn City cannot be adequately described with the word city. Within the city, there are mutually independent stylistically distinct urban areas and various types of architecture. There are forests, lakes, seas, and mountain ranges. It can be called a self-sustaining independent realm. This city of terrifying size encircled by towering city walls is divided into 7 major zones. The 6 major zones are managed by the new 6 talents, and the central zone where the new king rests. Although most of the architecture has changed, the distribution is practically unchanged. Even the air smelled familiar to Aang as he basked in the city's vibes. He recalls a past memory, where was being celebrated by the people. He remembers a location, where there used to be his statue. But seeing it up close now, it was covered in bandages. Paris tells him that the statue of the old king Aang respects has existed for decades, and that the people carved it of their own accord back when the old king was still around. She even went on to tell him that the old king had captured the hearts of the people back then, but decided to stop talking about it as she heard that they will soon take it down, replacing it with an even larger statue of the new king in its place. But as she rubs her face, she comments that she didn't know if it's luck or misfortune, before telling Aang that right below the statue is a member of the old 6 talents he was speaking of. Aang looks in the same direction, shocked and surprised to see a green-robed figure standing before the statue, holding a bouquet of flowers. Paris reveals that the figure is the old 6 talents Viralina, the strongest septuple core recovery warrior. Just the mention of her name and presence were enough to cause Aang to tremble as he stood still. Recalling the past image of his comrade, he calls out to her, "Lena." She hears his voice. Taking down the hood, she turns around to see who it was that was calling for her. But a man comes in and smacks the flowers out of her hands, shouting at her that she couldn't reminisce here even though she was one of the old 6 talents. Lena could only stare as her flowers fell to the ground, while Paris looked away with a painful expression on her face. Aang on the other hand was excited to see what would happen next, seeing that a simple patrolling warrior was messing with Lena, who might be a recovery class warrior, but was famous for having a violent temper. But then she simply apologizes to the patrol warrior, dropping down to her knees to pick up her ruined flowers. Damn anyone else tearing up right now. This sight of her was shocking to Aang. As the patrol warriors continued to scold Lena, his face was filled with anger, shouting at her that the old 6 talents were no longer warriors since they lost the qualifications to possess a core. He reminded her that if the new king hadn't allowed for her to stay in the city, then they would have thrown her out of Breaking Dawn to fend for herself against the demons a long time ago. He even points to Aang, statue, cursing Aang for acting so cockily as the old king, blaming him for causing humanity to live so passively right now. He continues to tell her that the statue of someone like him should be demolished as soon as possible since it was a garbage waste of space, but Lena had enough of his words, slapping the douchebag right across his ugly face. which causes him to strike back, but something quick intervenes as a familiar greatsword appears just inches away from the asshole's face, making him freeze in fear. Aang had appeared by Lena's side, wielding his greatsword. He looks at the douchebag, asking him with a pissed-off face, "How dare you?"
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.